بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى في شان حبيبي إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل على سيدنا مولانا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه دائما أبدا. صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. Today is the 9th of Dhul Qa'dah, which means that exactly 1 month from today, the 9th of Dhul Hajj, will be the Hajj. And inshallah in the coming weeks we'll speak about the Hajj. But as I mentioned last week, one of the major events that happened in this month, in this year 6th of Hijri, was Surah Hudaybiah. So Surah Hudaybiah took place in this month, and the background to that, we'll go over the background and some of this, I guess, more specific aspects of it as we go along. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sees in a dream that he is entering Makkah and making tawaf. And as was his practice after Fajr Salat, sometimes he would tell them the dreams that he had seen, and sometimes they would tell him the dreams that they had seen, and he would interpret them for them. And so when he tells the companions about this dream, they know that the dreams of the prophets are true. And if you think about it, if you look at those who had immigrated, it had been 6 years since they had seen the Kaaba. So they all are very eager to make this trip. And they say, Ya Rasulullah, let's go now. Let's go now. And he agrees to go. And so along with 1,400 companions, in some narrations 1,500, but most people, 1,400 companions, he makes this trip. Before he makes the trip, he also makes an announcement that who is willing to go with him. And there were many people who chose not to go because they were afraid of what would happen. Quraysh, the hostilities with Quraysh, of course, were at a peak. You had just ended Khandaq a year earlier. And Quraysh is still trying to figure out some way of ending Islam, ending Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so many people who could have gone did not go. And this will be significant when he comes back, because when he comes back from this journey, he will immediately make preparations to go to Khaybar. And at that time he will announce that only those people who went to Hudaybiah can go to Khaybar. Those who were with us in the times of difficulties are the ones who can join us at a moment when there might be some gain. And this is an important concept to understand, and we see this throughout the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they head out, and of course they're not going for war. They put on their ihram, and they are carrying, some of them are carrying their swords, which amongst the Arabs was not an uncommon thing. Carrying your sword was not a sign of war. The sword was used for many things. And so they head out. When Quraysh hear that they are coming, they send a cavalry of 200 men, headed by Khalid bin Walid and Ikramah bin Abi Jahl, to go and intercept them. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he changes directions. So And of course, if you're coming from Medina to Mecca, you'll be coming from the north. He goes around Mecca and comes to Hudaybiah, which is towards the south. They arrive there, and there's a well there, which was basically empty. They were able to use it a little bit, and then there's no more water. And so this is when Rasulullah ﷺ takes some of the water into his mouth and spits it into the well. And of course the well is full. Before that, because they needed to make wudu, he took a vessel of water and he places his hand in that water. And 1,400 companions make wudu with that small vessel of water. And the companions, they say that we saw water gushing forward from the fingers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that water is the best water that the earth has ever seen. People think Zamzam. Zamzam is the best water that most of us see, or most of us drink or taste. The water that came from the hand of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Zamzam has no comparison to that, because of the connection to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Quraysh, of course, are determined not to allow the Muslims to come. One interesting point here to note, which is relative to what's been going on, forever, and what we're seeing today. If you know, in Arabia, before Islam, you have 4 sacred months, and these, of course, continue on even in Islam. Rajab, which is separate, and then you have 3 continuous months, or contiguous months, which are Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hajj, and Muharram. Because these are the months that people would come for the Hajj, and then go back from the Hajj. And so during these months there was no fighting. Again, this is before Islam as well. So even the mushrikeen of Quraysh, they didn't fight during these months. These were the sacred months, no fighting. Because people should be safe to come for Hajj and go back, or come for Umrah and go back. And Quraysh, even if they were at war with you, if you came for Umrah, you were welcomed. There was no hostility at that moment. Hostilities would resume later on. Of course, with Islam and the Muslims, all the rules change. Like these days, people talk about international law. International law is only for them. When it comes to the believers, everything goes. So same thing back then, same thing today. If it had been anybody else, Quraysh would not have stopped them. But because it is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Muslims, now Quraysh is stopping them. Long story short, Quraysh sent ambassadors to go and meet with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They all come back to Quraysh and say, look, make peace with him. He is here for the Umrah, he's not here to fight, make peace with him. All of those ambassadors get abused. Finally they choose Urwa bin Mas'ud al-Thaqafi. But he takes a guarantee from them, look, you're not going to abuse me after I come and give my decision. So he comes, he pays very close attention. This is a man who's been the ambassador to Najashi, to Qisra, to Qaisar. He's been all over the world, seen all of the kings. He comes back and he tells Quraysh, he says, look, I've traveled the whole world. I've seen all of these kings. Never have I seen a people, or never have I seen a leader more respected than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he makes wudu, they don't allow the water of the wudu to touch the ground before someone takes it in his hands. And then he rubs his face. And if someone isn't able to get any, he comes and he rubs the hands of the ones who did. When he spits, They don't allow her spit to touch the ground before someone catches it. When he gives a command, there is no hesitation in following the command. And so look, so make peace with him. Because there is no way you can win against them. Determination and the attitude is 90% of the fight. And he understood this. But he also saw who these people were, and he understood this aspect from a worldly standpoint. Even then he's saying, look, make peace with him. Eventually, they decide, we'll send Suhail bin Amr. So Suhail bin Amr is one of the chieftains of Quraysh who was captured in Badr. Very eloquent poet. He used to do poetry against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he was captured in Badr, and when he was captured in Badr, Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, Ya Rasulullah, so let's pull out one of his teeth, one of his front teeth. That way the words won't come out properly, and people won't listen to him anymore. And Rasulullah says that I fear if I do that, then I fear that Allah will disgrace my face. And today he says things which you dislike. One day perhaps he'll say things which you like. Of course, after Fath Makkah, he accepts Islam. And then after the passing of Rasulullah, he is the one who kept Quraysh from apostating. Otherwise, if Quraysh apostated, then all of the rest, then the Muslims would have no support at all. And Islam would be disfigured. As the Rasulullah said that if I disfigure his face, then Allah will disfigure my face, meaning the face of Islam. And he is the one who said, when Quraysh were contemplating apostating like everybody else had, who came in front of the Kaaba and he said, look, let us not be the last to enter Islam and the first to leave it. And if we find out anybody is contemplating this, we will deal with them. So he comes. He is the ambassador that Quraysh sent to finalize the treaty. Ali Karamallah Wajh is the one who is writing the treaty. Ali starts writing the treaty, with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Suhail says, who is this Rahmanir Rahim? We don't know this. Have him write Bismillah Allahumma, which is what the Arabs used to write before. So Rasulullah says to Ali, erase what you have written and write what he says. So Ali he erases Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and writes Bismillah Allahumma. And then Ali continues writing. And if you look at all of the letters Rasulullah wrote, or any of the treaties that he had written, so all of the letters that he had written, all of the treaties that he had written, they all started, of course, with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and the next statement was that this is an agreement, or this is a letter from Muhammad Rasulullah, or an agreement between Muhammad Rasulullah and whoever. This is why Qisra tore up the letter, because the name of Rasulullah came before his name. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tore his empire. So when Ali writes that this is an agreement between Muhammad and Rasulullah, Suhail, he objects again. He says, if we accepted you as Rasulullah, then we would not be having this discussion. Right, Muhammad ibn Abdullah. So Rasulullah says to Ali write as he says. Do as he says. Erase it and write that. And Ali says, I won't. Rasulullah does not chastise him. He says, give me the paper. The hadith is in Sahih Muslim. He takes the paper, he erases Muhammad Rasulullah and tells Ali, now write it. And now he writes Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And Quraysh. And we may come back to this point if I have time. And we've talked about it before, so I'm not going to go over it right away. Those who have been listening regularly, should understand this point. Why Ali had no hesitation in erasing the first, but he refused to erase the second. And then the terms of the treaty. So the terms of the treaty were what? Number one, the Muslims will not make Umrah this year. They will go back to Medina and they will be allowed to come back next year, and the Quraysh will leave Makkah for 3 days and the Muslims will make the Umrah during that time and then go back. There will be peace between the Muslims and Quraysh. Anyone who is aligned with Quraysh is also part of the treaty. Anyone who is aligned with the Muslims is also part of the treaty. So there will be no hostilities between either Quraysh and their allies or the Muslims and their allies. Those who abandon Quraysh, those who leave, their non-Muslim relatives and come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will have to be handed back over. Those who leave the Muslims and come and seek asylum with Quraysh or their allies will not have to be handed back over. And the agreement will be for 10 years. And of course, Quraysh violated the agreement in 2 years. They couldn't even last 2 years. It's unfortunate there are a lot of people who take this treaty today and they justify normalization with the enemies of Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, using this agreement of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, if you look at the agreement, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is agreeing to all of this with the upper hand, even though in appearance everything is going against the Muslims. The reality is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not only has the authority to enforce it, but Quraysh understand that authority. When these so-called Muslim countries are making these agreements, they have no authority. They are puppets themselves. There's a huge difference between that and this agreement. But they want to abuse that and say, oh, no, see, this is just like what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. It has nothing to do with that. The other aspect of that, if you look at the agreement that, anyone who leaves the non-Muslims and seeks asylum with the Muslims will have to be handed over. On the other end, if anyone leaves the Muslims and seeks asylum with the non-Muslims, they don't have to be handed over. Quraysh themselves came and asked that this be canceled, for various reasons, and I don't have time to go into that right now. Of course, after the agreement is signed, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells the companions to slaughter their animals, to shave their heads and slaughter their animals, and no one moves. Of course, you have a lot of people who say, oh, they were so upset that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had done this. Astaghfirullah. These are people who have no concept of who the companions are. And they forget everything that Urwa bin Mas'ud mentioned before. These are people who don't hesitate in fulfilling the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So why didn't anybody move? Of course, he comes into his tent, and his wife, Bibi Salma, radiallahu anha, she says to him, you do it, and then they will follow you. And again, that gets into a lot of other stuff which I don't have time for, but he does it, and then they all do it. Why didn't they move the first time? Because they're in shock. at what is going on, and they can't understand it. So when he gives the order, they don't even hear it. When you're in shock, people are talking to you, and it's like, you don't hear anything. But when they see him doing what he's doing, they have no hesitation in following him. And then they're doing it so rapidly that when they're shaving each other's head, they're cutting the skin because they don't want to be, they're so sad that they were delayed in doing this. Not because they were upset with him, astaghfirullah. On the way back is when Surah Fath is revealed, Surah number 48. The whole surah is revealed at that moment. And the beginning of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina. That indeed we have, for your sake, given this manifest victory. Laka fatham mubina. Which is interesting because it doesn't make a huge difference in this verse, but it makes a huge difference in the next verse as to how people translate it. Unfortunately, you look at like 99% of translations, and they leave out the laka. It's not even mentioned. And the way people understand it, unfortunately, also, it's not even mentioned. So they translate it, Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina. That we have given you a manifest victory. Which again, in this verse, it doesn't make a huge difference. The next verse, لَيَغْفِرُ اللَّهُ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. And then وَيُتِمُّ نِعْمَتَهُ عَلَيْكَ وَيَهْدِكَ صِرَاطًا مُسْتَقِيمًا. Generally, how this gets translated is that so that we may forgive your past and future sins and complete our favors upon you and guide you to Sirat al-Mustaqim. This is how it generally gets translated. But if you look at that translation, laka was thrown out. Laka means for you, for your sake. So even if I don't know that, and I look at this initial translation, then my question is, dham, it's a sin that you commit with your hands. It's a sin of action. Itham is the sin of plotting or thought. But dham is the sin of action. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I take this initial translation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that so that we may forgive your previous sins and the ones you're going to commit in the future. So that he's not only, telling him that you've already committed these sins and the expectation is you're going to commit more sins in the future. The question is, what sins? What sins? When we make Salatul Janazah, for the adults, the dua is different. For the children, the dua is different. So, for the adults, what do we say? We start off right at the beginning. Allahumma ighfir li hayyina wa mayyitina. That Allah forgive, those who are alive and those who have passed. For the children, there is no asking for forgiveness. It's simply, oh Allah, make them a fard for us. Make them go forward and prepare the coming for us, and make them a treasure and a reward for us, and accept their intercession on behalf of us. This is the rough translation of the meaning of the dua that is made for Salatul Janazah, that's made for children. Why? Because the child is ma'soom. They are innocent. There are no sins. I mean, why are you going to ask for forgiveness for the sins of someone who has no sins? And then when we look even further, you know, if you look at the books of hadith, they talk about Salatul Janazah for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Read it. How was the Salatul Janazah for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made? First question, who was the Imam? There was no Imam. There was no Salat the way we make Salat. Because they discussed this. First discussion was, do we bathe him? And the answer was yes, but we don't remove his clothes. And we're talking about all of these companions who, you know, are like the greatest of companions. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, the wives of Rasulullah. So they're all involved in this discussion. The second question, well, the first question, of course, even before that was, where do we bury him? Which, of course, Abu Bakr radhiyallahu said what? Prophets are buried where they passed. He passed in the house of his wife, Aisha Siddiqa radhiyallahu anha. This is where he will be buried. Second question was about the bathing. Third question was Salatul Janazah. How do we make Salatul Janazah for him? You do not, again, to ask for forgiveness for someone, you know, oh Allah, forgive his sins. He doesn't have any sins. He is Sayyidul Masumeen. He is the master of all of those who are innocent. So what sins? So what did they decide? They said there will be no Salatul Janazah. Again, read the hadith. What did they do? They would come into the room 10 at a time. Ali would teach them a salawat, sending salawat on Rasulullah. They would stand there, send the salawat, they would leave, the next 10 would come. And this went on until he passed on Monday. They finally buried him on Wednesday. Again, why? Because he's Sayyidul Masumeen. How can you ask for forgiveness? To ask for forgiveness for him is to imply that he can sin. And anyone who thinks that he can sin, you know, that implies you have no iman. What was he always concerned about? Rasulullah was concerned about what? About the ummah. When Surah Wad-Duha is revealed, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and I swear, the la here is qasmi. According to Sayyidina Ali radhiyallahu, the la here is qasam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing that I will give you so much that you will be pleased with me. When the verse is revealed, what was the response of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? He said, Ya Allah, I will not be pleased until all of my ummah enters Jannah. We forget him all the time. He never forgot us. When Surah Fath, when this verse is revealed, Rasulullah says that a verse has been revealed upon me, the likes of which was never revealed to any other prophet. Which again tells you that this isn't, oh, we're forgiving your sins. He doesn't have any sins. All of the prophets are masoom. And if someone questions the action of Adam a.s., then we can go into that, and we've gone into that in the past, but I don't have time to go into that right now. لَيَغْفِرْ لَكَ اللَّهُ, so that Allah, for your sake, can forgive the sins of those of the past and those of the future. Who are those? The ones who came before and the ones who are to come. The sins of his ummah. We are the sinners. And this is why he said that such a verse that had never been revealed before to anyone else And we're so messed up that we think that it's his sins, astaghfirullah. And when you try to tell most people, they have an issue because they're brainwashed into the way they think. There's one brother from Morocco. We were in Raleigh, and I'll end with this. We were in Raleigh at a wedding. The imam was from Morocco, and just so happened that Friday we were there. The imam mentions this verse, and he translates it like, incorrectly, like most people do. So my father went to him afterwards calmly and said, "MashaAllah, nice khutbah." But he says, "I just want to know, in this verse that you recited, where did the laka go? And what dham did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam commit?" The brother was sincere, and he immediately started crying because of his sincerity, and he immediately understood. But that's not the majority of people anymore, unfortunately. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand and fill our hearts with his true love and the true love of his beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an obligation to love him above everything else in creation. And true love makes the lover blind and deaf. That he is blind to any shortcomings in his beloved, and he is deaf. He is not willing to hear any shortcoming against his beloved. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only the lover of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is the creator of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has created him without any shortcomings. خُلِقْتَ مُبَرًّا مِنْ كُلِّ عَيْبٍ. This is Hassan bin Sabit radiallahu anhu. That you have been created without any faults. And may he give us the love of Ahlul Bayt and the love of the Sahaba Ikram and all of those who Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam love, and may He give protection and victory to our brothers and sisters in Gaza and to all of the Muslims throughout the world that are being oppressed, wherever they are being oppressed, against the oppressors. Those who have not made sunnah, go and make sunnah.